Hey everyone, welcome to A Mess Nonetheless. I am Rachel, and unfortunately today there is no Melissa. So Melissa, at the time of recording this, is actually dealing with some heart things, and you might have seen it on social media. And we just decided to go ahead with the podcast that we had planned today with a guest. We were going to record two, release them throughout the year, and so today I am with my friend Kristin. Melissa and I are both good friends, and our mom too, actually, with Kristin. So Kristin, go ahead and say hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm super glad you're here. We're not talking about anything fun today, so be warned. Obviously, if you're listening, you have seen the title, but I'm really glad that Kristin is here. What we're going to talk about today is really, really important. Um, I will let Kristin share her story a little bit, but first, I just want to say if you are a person who struggles with mental health or thoughts of suicide, or you know someone, you have a child or a spouse or a friend or a family member, this is a really important episode. And honestly, even if you are like, I don't think I know anybody like that, you will at some point. And I truly believe everyone needs to take a listen, even though it is maybe going to be tough, but I think it's so important in the world that we live in today. So, Kristin, will you, why don't we just introduce you, Kristin? Tell us what you do, where you live, your people, that kind of stuff.
Sure. I live in Marshall, Minnesota, so Southwest Minnesota. I am a mother of four, and right now we have a son that's in his second year of college, and then we have two middle schoolers, one in seventh grade and one in eighth grade. So we're super busy with football and sports right now,
Yep.
and then I work with my husband full time. So he does estate planning and I run his office. So the two of us kind of do that together. And so we're super busy work wise and just kind of, you know, managing our children and our three dogs that is
Yeah.
crazy in our in our home. And then we have a fourth son, Isaac, who is kind of why we're here today. I'm gonna share about Isaac and our story with him and kind of his process through some of his mental health struggles and how we lost him to depression and suicide in 2019.
Yeah. You want to just take a few minutes and briefly recap? I mean, we've got a lot of things we're going to talk about today, but just kind of share with us as much as you can, wrap it up in a 3 to 5 minute window. Isaac's story, your story with Isaac.
Sure, sure. So, Isaac was our oldest, and he was one of those kids that, like, if he had been able to have been typed on the Enneagram, I would have said he was probably a two. I mean, he was so much like me in the way that he was a giver, he was a caretaker.
Mm,
He was 7 years older than our next son, Gabe. And so, like, when Gabe came along, he was changing diapers. I mean, he was a helper in all ways. And
yeah.
that kind of carried through, his adult life. He took care of people. He wanted to see that other people succeeded. The downfall of that is that, um, as you know, if you're a two, if you are somebody that is a helper or a giver, sometimes you put your own mental health, your own well-being, ahead of other
Right.
people. And that happened
Hmm.
too. He would, wanted to make sure that everybody else was taken care of, and sometimes to his own detriment. Um, we
Right.
did not know. I will say that when we moved to Marshall when he was a freshman in high school, and that was a really hard transition. We had lived in a community for 13 years prior to that, so it was the only community that he had known. He had best friends there, and so when we moved to Marshall, it was an incredibly hard transition. It took a long time for him to make friends. He was an introverted kid, not super outgoing, and it wasn't easy for him. And so this was never a place that felt like home to him. And so
Yeah.
that was really, really tough. There apparently were things that were happening during his high school years that we were unaware of. Um, we found out later once he went to college, and some things happened in college that he had been cutting in high school. It was not things that we had any idea
Mm,
going on. He was doing it
mm,
places that were easy for him to hide, on his upper
yeah.
thigh or on his arms, and places that, like, were always covered. And so we just never saw it.
Yeah.
He was quiet, but he he had got good grades. He did his homework. He didn't drink. He didn't do
Mm-hmm.
drugs. He didn't go out and party. Like
Right.
he was a good brother and a good kid. And so we didn't see any warning signs from that perspective.
Right. Right.
And so he went to college for his first year.
Gosh, that's
and
hard.
yeah, it is hard because as a parent, you want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
see those things going on. And he just
Right.
was really good at keeping it hidden. And so when his first year of college didn't
Mm-hmm.
go as planned, I know there's a lot of people. My husband and I both went to our first year of college and it didn't go well. And we had to change to a different school. And that was devastating. And when that happened to Isaac, it was devastating to him. And he felt like a failure. And
Sure. Mm-hmm.
when he transferred to a different school, there was an episode and he cut himself, and he cut himself really severely. And the ambulance was called, and he was taken for his first stay at a mental facility. And that's when the reality, when he started to be a little bit
Right.
honest with us that this is something that had been going on. He'd been doing this for years. We had
Mm-hmm.
an idea, and and I just wanted to fix it. I just wanted to make
Mm-hmm.
it better. And that for
Right.
us was the start of many years of in and out of facilities for him. Sometimes he was forced, sometimes he went on his own. And
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately, the last year of his life, things seemed to us to be really good. Our relationship
Yeah.
was really good. He had a good job. There were some things personally that were going on that were really stressful to him that we knew about, but we thought he was handling it. And so
Mm-hmm.
when he died in December of 2019, it was a complete and utter shock to us.
Right.
So
Oh, it's
it's
just so
hard.
sad.
Yeah.
It's not easier, I think, if you see it coming, but to feel so blindsided is that much worse, I'm sure.
That,
Like, it's all
yes.
terrible, of course, but
Yeah.
we were walking through that with you, and you just had endless questions and none of them had answers. And that's what's so hard about depression and suicide. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And there aren't the answers that we all want. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. We're going to talk more obviously about it. I would like to share my little experiences, not my little,
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
experiences with this as well, so that we can kind of merge them together at different times. Obviously, I've not lost a son, and there is nothing that could be the same as losing a child. But when I was 19, my best friend from childhood, we lost him to suicide, and we didn't see it coming that particular short season, like that summer. We didn't see it coming, but he had been struggling with depression for years. And it was like that one summer, he just kind of lived his best life and then ended it. And it was like, so it's like everybody thought he was doing well as well. And that really, really, rocked us all, of course. And just, we were good friends. We were good family friends. So we just, walked through it with his parents, and we went and stayed there for a week, and we spoke at the funeral. It was a lot. And then he was young, 19 years. I think he was actually 20. And then I've had some of my own kids in and out of facilities, the behavioral health units, a number of times. I think we probably 6 times between a few of them. And then myself, I was suicidal when Ephraim is 10, and when he was a baby, maybe 8 or 9 months old. I had really bad postpartum depression, and it tanked so quickly. It was bad. It was getting bad in March, and by April, I was like, I'm out. And so I've been suicidal a couple times. That was the worst. 2 other times where I was like, oh, this isn't good, but it didn't last as long. And I am just, the way I've dealt with it is I'm just very, very, very open with people. I'm a mom. Like, it's like you wonder, why don't people tell, what's going on with them? But if you don't feel like you have anything to live for, then it's like, why would you? And for me, I didn't feel like I had anything to live for. Like, I didn't, every time I have felt suicidal, it's like, I'm like, I don't understand that having something to live for has never pulled me out of it. It's knowing what it would do to my children. That's the only thing that has pulled me out of it. And God has used that for me to tell people, like, hey, you might not want to leave me alone for a little bit. You might want to incessantly bug me because I'm not in a good place right now or whatever. And so it's weird because I am a pretty positive person in life, and like I'm happy and I laugh a lot and I have a lot of joy. But when that darkness comes over, there is like nothing like it. And it is not something that you can explain. Like, how can I be happy in this moment and then be like, I would literally take my life in this moment? I just honestly feel like it's just the devil has entered this world, sin has entered this world, and there is no goodness in the enemy at all. And when I'm in that place, like I just feel covered by the enemy. And I've never been suicidal more than a month, and that's a long time. But I think people who struggle with it day in and day out, year after year, I mean, and I don't know for Isaac, of course, and I don't know for my friend Cam how much he was thinking about death leading up to his death. But I now have more experience with children who have struggled with this of my own. And just, it's something that, like, if you can get people to talk about it, it's so much better. Like, it's so much better. Like, you would have given anything, I know, to know what
Yeah.
Isaac was thinking. So you could have stepped in, and if people don't talk about it, there is nothing we can do. And so if you're listening and you're like, well, I have a child or a friend or whatever who's regularly struggles with depression, it's time to start asking some questions. Do you think about dying? How often do you think about dying? Like, I have a child right now. We are having these conversations. I don't think that this child is suicidal, but the child thinks about dying a lot, and just thinking that that wouldn't be so bad to just not be here. And these are scary things to have one of your kids be thinking. And so the more we can make this child comfortable with, let's ask these questions, let's talk about it pretty regularly, let's check in on a scale of 1 to 10, today, how are you feeling, things like that. But like mental health and suicide, it's always, I mean, Kristin's older than me, and growing up in the 80s, and it's like you don't talk about it. It's like it was such taboo if somebody did end their life by suicide, and certainly people didn't talk about being depressed leading up to that, or being on medication, or even seeing a therapist. It was all just so taboo, and it just isn't anymore. And I mean, I know that it can still be, but like, we are changing things. Like, people are talking about it, and we are making a change. And I want to be part of that. I know you are very, very verbal on social media, and I appreciate everything that you share. So that's my experience with, depression and suicide. So, Kristin, what do you think is important for people to understand about mental health and suicide, whether somebody has died of suicide or they just think of suicide, like the suicide ideation? Is that what they call it?
Yeah, yeah. So I think that one of the biggest things is just that, like, mental health, suicide, it can happen to any family. Like, it doesn't matter if you're wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you're a Christian family.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you're great parents. I used to have this, I will be honest, I used to have this perspective that if you were somebody that died by suicide, you were very selfish. That was my mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if I would hear a story that somebody
Right.
had taken their own life, I thought, well, how selfish of them. How could they do that to their
Mm-hmm.
family?
Well, it's definitely
And
what I grew up thinking too.
yeah,
And we
yeah,
probably grew up thinking that because we probably heard that.
right. Yeah, that's what people would say in response. And about 2 years before Isaac died, it was kind of in the worst of it. About 2 years before Isaac died was kind of the worst part of his mental health journey, where we had to have him
Mm-hmm.
sent to the hospital, and he wasn't happy about it, and he didn't talk to us for almost a year, and
Mm-hmm.
it was really, really ugly. And I came across this gentleman named Sam Eaton, and he's out of Minnesota, and he is really open about the fact that he went through a very difficult time. He's struggled on and off with depression for years and years, and he came to a point where he just said, I'm done. I'm going to take my life on this day. And he had, like, chosen a day, and something happened. And he credits God. He says God intervened, and something happened that day, and he didn't take his life. And he now is using his experience to share what happened to him,
Yeah.
and use it as a way to bring hope to others. And one of the things, the
Yeah,
first things that I
great.
ever heard from him 2 years ago was suicide isn't selfish. That the people that are dealing,
Mhm.
that have chosen, that have taken their own life, they're helpless. Like they're in that
Right.
moment, they are at their most helpless place. That all they want to do is end their
Well, and on
pain,
top of
stop their
it,
suffering.
right. Well, and on top of it, when you're in that place, you feel like such a drain on everyone. You feel like everyone would literally be better if you were gone. And so it's the opposite of selfish. It is like I'm relieving everybody of the burden that I am in this
Yeah,
place. And that's so backwards to what you do think, or especially what most of us grew up thinking. But as somebody who's been in that place, like I was like, I'm such a burden. And like I said, if I didn't have children, I really don't think anything else would have been like enough to pull me out of that. But it was like, okay, but also just picturing my children having to deal with my death. I mean, just no matter how it came, like you just don't want your kids to have to walk through a death of a parent, and kids shouldn't have to. But for me, it was like I'm just this massive burden, and oh my gosh, nobody should have to deal with me. And so, what a gift it would be to the world if I took myself out of it. And that doesn't make sense to me now. Like I know that I felt that way, but I'm like, how could I think that way? But that's where this just darkness consumes you, and
right.
it speaks lies that make so much sense, that are so, so, so believable.
Right. And I was listening to a podcast the other day where she was talking, she's also struggled with mental health and suicidal ideation. And just kind of said the same thing. Like those feelings are so oppressive. And, I haven't
Mm-hmm.
experienced them necessarily to that level, like for long term, but just that they're so
Mm-hmm.
oppressive, and you do start to believe like the truth that it would just be easier for
Mm-hmm.
everyone
Right.
if you weren't here.
Right.
And when I hear those
Right.
things, it gives me some insight into maybe what he was thinking. I mean, I don't know for sure because he
Right.
wasn't open with me about what he was feeling
Right.
and thinking, but it does make me think that's probably some of the lies that he believed. Like I
Mm-hmm.
am a
Absolutely.
burden. It would just be so much easier if they didn't have to deal with this, all of the bills, all of the,
Mm-hmm.
the problems that I'm causing, all of the
Mm-hmm.
heartache that I'm causing. It would be so much easier if I just weren't here.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is so sad. But
Right.
and the truth is like what I understand of Isaac, what I have seen of him is like he was just this loving, amazing person. Like he would do anything for his family. And so
Right.
he
Yeah.
had to have been thinking that, to feel like, because like a person in that moment, they do know they're going to hurt their family by taking themselves, but they think it's just a short-term pain. But I'm
Right.
relieving them of the long-term burden. And yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you think talking about these kinds of things can like help our society? Like why do you think it's important that we talk more about it, and what could that change for, you know, the world we live in?
Well, I think that for a long time, mental health issues just have been shrouded in so much shame. I mean, like you were saying before, we grew
Mm-hmm.
up. You don't share about those things. You don't talk about going to a therapist. You don't talk about suicide.
Right.
You don't share about the struggles that your own kids are having. I'll share this about my
Mm-hmm.
husband, and only because I think this shows, even just how we were all raised when we first heard about Isaac. His initial response, and I give him so much grace for this, just because I was hearing a
Mm-hmm.
different message for the 2 years before Isaac died of, this is, we can talk about these things. And he wasn't necessarily getting that message.
Right.
And the first thing
Right.
that he said was, well, we don't need to tell anybody. Like I said, we need to call our
Like
pastor.
how
We
he
need to
died.
tell our church. And he was like, we're not going to
Mm-hmm.
tell anybody. Like we were not going to have a funeral. We're not going to, and it's like, this is our son.
Mm.
We
Oh, I
still
didn't realize
love
that part.
him.
Yeah. Right.
We I'm not ashamed of him. I don't I'm not
Right.
happy
Mm-hmm.
the way that he died. And I wish it was a different
Mm-hmm.
story. But he's still our son, and I still love
Mm-hmm.
him. I'm still proud of
Right.
him. I mean, he was an amazing kid,
Right.
and I'm
Right.
still proud of
Mm-hmm.
him. And so I think that when we hear other people's stories, when I listen to, a woman on a podcast talking about how she struggled for her whole life with suicidal ideation, and she's doing things to try to, combat that and work through it,
Mm-hmm.
I have compassion for people like that. And I
Right.
recognize like how hard it
Mm-hmm.
must be day in and day out to
Right.
deal with that kind of,
Right.
sickness. And I think that we
Right.
need to be able to be willing to share those hard things. We get dressed
Right.
up. Like I don't come on a podcast. I don't go to church on Sunday morning looking my worst. I put on makeup and I put on my
Right.
nice clothes, and I want people to
Yeah.
think that I've got it all together. And what they don't see is like maybe I'm screaming at my kids or I'm screaming at my husband in the car ride on the way to church because we're
Hmm.
fighting over something stupid.
Hmm.
Like we don't like
Right.
to show people our reality, our
Hmm.
struggles. We want people to see
Hmm.
like the pretty package on the outside. And
Right.
I
Even
just think
in
we do
death.
people a disservice. Yeah. And we do people a disservice when we do that. And I think
Hmm.
that,
I agree.
you know, Isaac was probably one of those that just wanted to, like, I've got it all together. It's okay. I'm okay. And what he was
Hmm.
doing, another part of
Yeah.
of his story is that he was, we've got a history of addiction in our family, extended family, and he was
Mm.
using drugs and alcohol to deal with the pain he was feeling as a
Right.
way to numb
Right.
the issues, and that led
Hmm.
to, I believe, in
Hmm.
in what ended up ultimately taking his life. And so you have to be so
Right.
careful in how you're choosing to deal with the pain. Just because
Yeah.
you've got
You're
mental health
right.
issues,
Hmm.
you can't pick up a bottle or pick up a drug or as your way of like
Hmm.
escaping it from that route. That's not the best way to
Right.
manage it.
No. Well, they're depressants, and you're only going to feel worse when your high or whatever wears off, and then now you
Right.
need it again to make you feel what you felt, and then it's cyclical. Yeah.
Right.
So if we have people listening, if we've got parents, aunts, teachers, right? Like we've got people listening who are all these things, and if they have someone they know or love who's dealing with mental health issues or possibly suicidal feelings, what should we do, in these roles? How should we take care of, like, obviously, I know you're not an expert, but like you've lived a lot of this and you've done a deep dive into understanding everything you can, which I really admire you for that. Like, you didn't just say, well, this happened and now we'll just grieve and, take our grief with us. You've been like, I want to understand my son. I want to understand what was going through his mind so that you can share. I admire that so much about you. So what should we do? One of our kids is struggling with depression, or we're a teacher and we see it in a kid, or I guess even if it's an adult, but what are things we should do and what are things we should not do?
Right. So sometimes it's hard for me to answer it only because I feel like if I had all the answers, Isaac would still be here. But
Sure,
I
that
feel
makes
like,
sense.
I can look back. I feel like I give myself grace and that as parents at the time, we did the best we could with what we had. And so I would say
Right.
that first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost to anybody that's listening, like if you are dealing with this, if you're walking with a child or somebody that you love that's dealing with mental health issues, you are doing the best you can with what you have, and know that. And so,
Right.
first and foremost, start with
Mm-hmm.
prayer. For a long
Mm-hmm.
time, I mean, I had this
Yeah.
visual where I would just sit with my hands open and just like literally pray, like, Lord, he is your son first.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he is
Mm-hmm.
yours. I get the opportunity to raise him
Mm-hmm.
and be his mother here on earth, but he is your son first.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to like
Right.
trust that you have a plan for this. And
Right.
so sometimes like the best thing that we can do is pray for them. You mentioned that,
Yeah.
like having these hard conversations.
And getting other people to pray. I
Yes.
don't think that we should
Yes.
skip the value of having many people praying. And I
Yes.
think I want to just say, I
Absolutely.
think it's easy to tiptoe and be like, I don't want anybody to know, but also like, but we need people praying. And so,
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we had people
sorry, I didn't
that
mean to cut you
knew
off.
about what. No, that's a super good point.
Mm-hmm.
We did have people that we trusted, that knew
Mm-hmm.
about our situation. There was a couple of times where we just had some close friends at church that would like pray over us at church
Mm-hmm.
for
Yeah.
some of his very specific situations because they understood,
Right.
like how dire things were.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes as parents, we have to make really hard choices. So there was a time in, I don't know, it was probably 2017, 2018, where he was sending me text messages that were really concerning. He sent me a video that was
Mm-hmm.
very concerning, and he was at college at that point, and we knew he had access to a firearm. He had purchased a firearm. I mean, we knew about that, and because we knew he had one, not because he was
Mm-hmm.
depressed, but just because he liked to go shooting with his
Right.
uncles and his dad,
Mm-hmm.
but we knew he had access
Yep.
to it. And at that point, it became very
Right.
concerning that he's on a college campus. There's all of these things happening on colleges campuses across the country, and I could just envision, could this be my son, who's
Mm-hmm.
suicidal and has access to a firearm on a college campus, and what could happen?
Right.
And so I
Right.
remember that morning we had to cancel appointments with clients and drive 2.5 hours down to his college dorm or his college apartment. And we sat outside of his college apartment for 5 hours before somebody finally came and we were able to get in. We were knocking on the door. I mean, he wouldn't answer the door.
Wow.
We had
Oh
no
my
idea what
gosh.
was going to happen. And he was fine. He was
Wow.
alive. He was not in good condition. He hadn't slept in days.
Yeah.
And we basically gave him an ultimatum and said, you can do this or you can do this. We will take you to the
Yeah.
hospital, or we'll call the cops and they'll take you. And I mean,
Yeah.
it was horrible. And as
Right.
a parent, you don't want to have to do
Right.
that, but we felt like we didn't have any other option.
No.
And so sometimes I think that you have to gauge your
Right.
situation and say, where are we at?
Mm-hmm.
And so we took him, and
Mm-hmm.
that started the year where he removed us as guardians, and only would talk to my sister. He added my sister as his point of contact, which was great because my sister would call me then and say, okay, this is what's happening. So I still got to
Yeah.
hear about what was
Yeah.
going on, but it was
Right.
an incredibly painful year for both of us, for
Right.
both Dominic and I. But it was something that we felt like we kept him alive, and we kept other people alive because of our choice, even though it was
Right.
probably one of the most
Right.
painful choices we had to make. And as a
Right.
result,
Mm-hmm.
during that time, we just prayed that God would restore that relationship, and he did.
Right.
And so we saw restoration during that horrible, horrible year where God brought him back to us and he was a little more healthy. We had a family vacation. And so sometimes we have to make really hard choices, and then we see the fruit of those hard
Right.
choices. Ultimately,
Yep.
with us,
Yep.
something horrible happened, later, but we are so grateful for
Mm-hmm.
that period of time that we had where we did see
Right.
restoration in that relationship. So I don't
Yep.
regret those
Yep.
choices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we've had similar situations where we've forced a kid into, they, like you said, sometimes it's voluntary when they go and sometimes it's not. And you have to do a lot to get somebody chaptered and committed against their will. And we did it. I mean, we had this child had attempted, threatened. I think it was more of a threat than an actual attempt, but it was supposed to appear as an actual attempt, and we took it seriously twice in 30 days. And we were like, okay, this isn't getting better. You are not nothing is making any changes here, and you're not doing any of the work you say you're going to do, because it takes work to get out of that place. And we had him committed, and I would go to the hospital every day during visiting hours and be told, he won't see you today. And I would leave and I would just sob in my car. And I had little kids, and I would have dropped them off at a friend's, and I would go to her house and I would just sob in her house, and I would go the next day and no, he won't see you. And I mean, he was there weeks because he refused, and they wouldn't let him out until he did the work. He had to actually involve his parents. And it's hard. And he could have cut us out for a year. Those are the kinds of things that happen when you make those hard decisions. But better to make those hard decisions and have, a rocky season in your relationship than for them or someone else to end up gone, And so
Right.
I totally agree with that. Sometimes you just have to make the hard decision, yeah, it's not fun. To have a kid who hates you and says they hate you, but in the end, in our situation and in yours, it's our kids could see, okay, I could see why you needed to do that at the time. I can see,
Right.
and there was restoration for all of us. But yeah, making those really hard decisions. Ugh. Yeah, I don't like reliving those times in my mind.
Yeah.
So, all right. What is there anything we should not do that you can say like, do not do this. I mean, I obviously don't ignore it. Like, obviously, I don't think outing people's, I guess I'm throwing a few out there, outing people's struggles for them, like in a public way. I was always really respectful of what my kids were walking through, as much as I felt I could ask for prayer and help, but also like respected, but that's tricky because I always want to share really real on social media. I want people to know like we're not this perfect family. We don't have it together, but also it's not always
Right.
my story to tell. And
Yeah.
so there were so many times that it's like, okay, so that's where sharing in private with people but yeah, can you think of things that it's like, this is not something you should be doing when you have somebody struggling with these issues?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I was really, when I see sometimes in my Facebook memories, posts come up and it's like, oh yeah, that was a really tough time with Isaac. And I'm just like asking for prayer, but not saying it's about Isaac. So I agree with that. Like, you've
Yep.
got to be really
I would do
careful
the same
when they're
thing.
alive. If they're,
Mhm.
if you're to do that. I can be more open about his story
Right.
now because he's not here.
Mhm.
And I'm certainly still protective
Right.
of certain aspects of his story, but,
Right.
for his memory's sake. But you do have to be
Mhm.
careful about that. I think one of the things when I look back at my relationship with him and maybe what I didn't do well was that I did just I wanted so badly just to make it better. Like, from my perspective, I could see, and I went through really hard times. Like, you know, had to change colleges, and I was pregnant before marriage with Isaac, and we went through active addiction before my husband got into recovery. Like, we have had some really,
Mhm.
really hard times. And so I can see from a perspective, from that lens, like, you can walk through really hard times. God will get you through if you trust in him. And sometimes I think that I would say to him, you just need to trust in God's plan, or you just need to, like,
Mhm.
God does have a plan for this. And what I have learned
Mhm.
now through grief, is that telling somebody that God has a plan for something when they're walking through something really hard is not helpful. It can actually
Mhm.
be hurtful.
Right.
Now, if I've walked through something
Yeah.
hard and can say for myself, God, I believe God did have a plan
Right.
through that. Like, God was able to use that hard situation
Mhm.
for me. But for me to tell my son that, God can do something really good with this, or if you just try, those are all true
Mhm.
things. It's not that they're not true. It's not that God
Mhm.
can't do it. But I don't know that those are the most encouraging words for him in that space, especially when
Right.
he's at that like super dark jumping off like point. Like,
Right.
Christian platitudes
Right.
don't really
Mhm.
make things better in those circumstances. And so I just think you have
Right.
to be careful
Right.
to not try to fix it with your words. Sometimes it's better just to sit
Right.
with people
Mhm.
in those hardest moments
Yes.
and
Mhm.
say, like, I am here. I
Mhm.
don't know exactly what you're going through, and I'm so sorry. And if, I want to be here for you. Um,
Mhm.
and I don't know why this is happening. Sometimes it's better to say
Right.
things
Oh,
like
that's so
that,
good, Kristen. It's really good.
than to say,
Yeah.
like, I know God has a plan. Well, he probably does, but they don't,
Yeah.
I don't think Isaac needed to hear that at that moment. I don't think that was helpful for him,
Right.
you know?
Right. Well, it's like when you lose someone you love, they're in a better place because they're with Jesus. But does that make your grief any better? Like, no, just because it's true doesn't mean it's a helpful thing to say or
Right.
hear. And yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying that because I think I need to remind myself of that in a current season I'm dealing with right now with one of my kids. So, okay, well, we have to wrap this up because this has gone a little long. But before we finish, please, if you have not rated our show, please go and do that on Spotify or Apple. We also have reviews on Facebook, and now I guess podcasts are on Audible, so you probably can rate it on there too. We have a ministry we want to spotlight. So Nick Cuck she started a ministry called Eminent, and Eminent is basically a special needs, like she's like a liaison for people who have kids in special needs. I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, but basically what she does is she walks through special needs planning with family members who are like, I don't know how to get services for my kids. I don't know what I can get, have them help with and things like that. And she is educating and helping empower families. And it's just such an incredible ministry. So if you know somebody who's in that place, please have them reach out to her. She is on Instagram. It's Eminent, EMINENT. I will, when we post this episode, I will also put her stuff on our social media. So you have to be paying attention for that. But the website is Eminent SNP, specialneedsplanning.com, eminentsnp.com. So that's the ministry that we are spotlighting this week. And thank you, Kristin, so much for coming on and sharing with us and just talking with me about this. So, all right, you guys, have a great week.
Thanks, Rachel.
You might feel that your life is a mess, but don't feel bad. Ours is too, but we own a microphone and we have no shame. That's why we'll talk about how our life is a mess nonetheless. That's the name of our podcast.